Hey everybody, Roger says hey. He's got on his combat helmet because today we are going to go back to the shores of Gallipoli with Sabaton. I'm really excited to continue this journey. I started it way back a few months ago when I reacted to Anzac Day because I had never heard of it before. And then I learned about Gallipoli through that, which I had never heard before. And then I watched a two-part documentary on Gallipoli not too long ago, a few weeks ago, and learned even more about Gallipoli. And so here today we are going to take a look at Sabaton's rendition of it. Now, of course, they have a music video for it, a song for it, but there's also a channel called Sabaton History that I like to go back and watch their videos on the history of whatever the Sabaton song is about. I do like knowing that before I listen to the song, because otherwise I feel like the song wouldn't really have very much meaning for me. Now, I do already kind of know about Gallipoli after watching some of the previous stuff, but I'm hoping that this history that they're going to be showing will shed a little bit more light, some new information that I haven't learned about yet. So this video is just going to be part one, because they have a part one and part two of the history on this, so we're going to do part one in this video. Part two will be following very, very shortly after it. And then in that video, we'll also include the official music video for Sabaton. Looking forward to it, so let's go.
I'm Indy Nidell.
And I'm Joaquin from Sabaton.
Hey, it's Joaquin.
This is Sabaton History.
Big boy.
Now, this song is going to be covered in 2 episodes, so I can cover 2 aspects of the topic.
Okay.
Gallipoli. For 8 months in 1915, that name was headline news worldwide.
Really?
And our song, Cliffs of Gallipoli, is a tribute to the men who fought and died there.
The Great War was just a half-year old, but casualties had already risen to unthinkable levels. British soldiers were dying by the tens of thousands in the bloody stalemate on the Western Front. Leading politicians began looking for an alternative to the slaughter in the trenches. Most vocal among them were Lord Kitchener, Secretary of State for War, and Winston Churchill, First Lord of the Admiralty, who thought that instead of trying to beat the Germans in Flanders, they should strike towards the weakest link of the Central Powers, the Ottoman Empire. They believed the Ottoman military to be second-rate, more of a nuisance than an equal. Churchill envisioned a strike against Constantinople itself by sea. Taking the Turkish capital would drive the Ottomans out of the war and open up a direct shipping route towards Britain's Russian ally. Indirectly, it would safeguard British interests in Mesopotamia and Suez as well. So on paper, this seemed like a total win-win for the Allies. A major reason for the British hubris was the recent military record of the Ottoman Empire. Serious defeats during the Balkan Wars and the recent catastrophic outcome of the Battle of Sarikamish just weeks ago, where tens of thousands of soldiers froze to death in the Caucasus Mountains, painted a picture of incompetent leaders and a badly equipped and trained Ottoman military. The sick man at the Bosporus would be no match for the professional British soldiers. There was, however, a major obstacle along the way. To strike...
Okay, first of all, I really like the way that they're setting this up. The other videos kind of very just briefly set up Gallipoli, but they didn't do this to where they kind of gave more of a general overview of Britain's strategy, and they did not talk about the Turkish or the Ottoman Empire and why the Brits thought that they could take them on. So I'm already learning some new things in this just in the first couple of minutes. This is great.
Strike against Constantinople, a major obstacle along the way. To strike against Constantinople, any Allied fleet would have to penetrate the Straits of the Dardanelles that guard the entrance to the Sea of Marmara. And those straits were narrow and had been a natural line of defense for centuries. And the sick man was not as sick as the British believed. Since the Balkan Wars, the defenses of the straits had been continually improved and ammunition restocked. In addition to long-range guns, the Ottomans had mobile 120mm howitzer batteries on the ready, highly trained troops, and line after line of mines in the waters. Under Çanakkale Fortified Area Command of General Fahri Pasha, the Dardanelles became the most fortified area of the whole Ottoman Empire. The British and French fleets tried to force passage through the straits. Even a modern warship can be sunk by a single mine, though. And after disaster on March 18, 1915, when the Ottomans sank 3 Allied battleships and severely damaged 3 more, the Allies had to rethink.
Hear them whisper, voices from the other side. Hear them calling, for my foes now friends are resting side by side.
The artillery positions on the hills had to be taken out first by land if the operation towards Constantinople was to succeed. The task was given to General Sir Ian Hamilton, in overall command of the Mediterranean Expeditionary Force. The MEF included, along with British units, the Anzacs, Australian and New Zealand Army Corps, under General Sir William Birdwood. Anzac had been heading for Britain before being diverted to Egypt. Instead of fighting Germans, they would now fight the Ottomans. The Australians, New Zealanders, and Maoris of Anzac considered themselves natural soldiers, men hardened by daily outdoor activity, and the aggressive and unruly character of the Anzacs seemed perfect for the task ahead. The MEF was further strengthened by an Indian brigade and the Gurkha Rifles, who joined the Anzacs and a French force at Malta in early March. The French government was not too keen on the whole endeavor, but they themselves had their own ambitions in the Middle East and could not simply leave it all to the British if they succeeded in toppling the Ottomans. The French created the 1st Division Corps Expeditionnaire d'Orient, made up of regular French troops, the French Foreign Legion, and Senegalese and Zouave forces. Once again, though, the planning phase betrayed the arrogance of British high command. While generals on the western or eastern fronts made plans for all sorts of eventualities and for a quick exit if everything suddenly went to hell, nothing of the sort was prepared for the Gallipoli landings. Instead, Hamilton's plan was overambitious, and it had one critical flaw. It all depended on the Ottoman inability to stand up to the invaders. But what if they did not turn and run, and instead stood and fought?
Well, we know what happened, don't we? Also, just the mixture of troops that the Allies have going against Germany and the Ottomans here. First of all, I didn't even know that the Ottoman Empire was an ally with Germany during this war. Like I said, I don't know much about World War One. So okay, that's nice to know about that alliance. I guess I'm just kind of like formulating the, what countries are with what countries during this war. I feel like I know World War II way better than I know World War One. Because it's just studied more, I guess. But yeah, it's so the mixture of that. And I've recently been reminded of like French colonialism in Africa and stuff through one of my soccer/football videos, believe it or not. And so this had hints of that because it looks like they have a lot of African troops involved with the French forces here. I think he said something about Senegal or something. So I guess I can see some remnants of that here as well. So yeah, in the Gurkhas, I mentioned the Gurkhas. I've had a couple of people ask me to watch stuff on the Gurkhas. So man, there's just like the more I watch this stuff, the more I realize just how much I don't know about any of this. It's kind of intimidating, just how much history there is. I mean, it's really impossible to learn all of this in school, because you only have a certain amount of time in school to learn history. And I feel like with kids especially, they hit all of like the major things, but they, you don't learn 90% of history. So it's just amazing. It's just amazing. I feel like I could do this YouTube channel for 100 years and probably still not like unearth all of history.
The German influence over the Ottoman forces was personified by General Otto Liman von Sanders in command of the 5th Army at Gallipoli. Ever since the naval attacks, it was thought that an invasion might take place. And the British did little to hide their intentions. In fact, the Greek newspapers ran headlines about the coming landings. But the Gallipoli Peninsula was large, and the Ottoman forces could not guard every beach. Von Sanders decided to put only a screening force as a tripwire defense close to the beaches and keep most of his men in reserve units further back. Ottoman officers at the front would assess the situation and send in reinforcements where necessary. One such officer was Lieutenant Colonel Mustafa Kemal, in command of the Ottoman 19th Division. He was familiar with the defenses, and his troops were well-trained, motivated, and equipped. In fact, with the help of German instructors and weapon supplies, it was quite a formidable fighting force. The landings began the night of April 25th. The Anzacs would land on the west of the peninsula at a place called Gaba later known as Anzac Cove. They would build a bridgehead and advance the next day all the way to the heights of Maltepe. The other British troops would land at the tip of the peninsula, Cape Helles, and then take Achibaba and the Kilid Bar Plateau in one fell swoop. After that, they would simply join forces and push the Ottomans from the heights. There were also several diversionary landings around the flanks, with the French landing on the Asian side of the straits at Kumkale.
I really like also how they're giving me a map and showing me the map of the peninsula and where everybody is landing and the actual strategy. This is something I did not get from the previous videos on Gallipoli that I watched. Of course, Anzac Day didn't really go into much of this at all. I just kind of talked about the history of the Anzacs and very, very brief. The documentary on Gallipoli, though, they didn't show any of this. They talked about it, but they didn't give me like a map and an overview of it. So I'm getting a much better picture right now of what the plans were and kind of where things went wrong. So I really like this like little short, history lesson that I'm getting here.
Illuminated by the moon, the Anzac landing craft made their way towards their destination, fighting the strong currents. The beaches were in darkness and all was still, and hopes were high that they would fully surprise the enemy. But as soon as they made ground, the first bullets crashed into the boats. A concert of rapid rifle fire erupted, and the battle for Gallipoli had begun. Anzac was not even facing an entire battalion, but the sudden fire caused confusion as the first casualties began to litter the beaches. As more and more Anzacs landed, the outnumbered Ottomans retreated to higher ground and into prepared trenches. And as the sun rose, they fired freely into the mass of men on the beaches. The Anzacs had been ordered not to load their rifles and instead rushed up the hill, bayonets fixed. But in the dim morning, it was hard to navigate the steep heights and the thorny undergrowth, and the Ottomans fired and retreated further. The Anzacs were soon left out in the open, trying to make sense of the rough terrain, climbing the high ridges, running through razor-sharp thorns and over slippery stones. Soon
these pictures that they're showing too, I'm assuming these are pictures of the of that day that he's talking about here, which I think they showed a couple here or there previously, but it's kind of cool to see this in action. Although it looks like here they're kind of resting and maybe taking a lunch break or something, but the previous pictures they were showing were pretty cool.
Climbing the high ridges, running through razor-sharp thorns and over slippery stones, soon left the men exhausted, and many fell to accurate Ottoman sniper fire. The maps were totally inadequate, and the officers still standing were overwhelmed by the situation. The Ottomans themselves retreated towards the heights of Chunuk Bair. From the high ground, they could direct artillery fire onto the beaches. Mustafa Kemal was among the first to understand that the landings at Anzac Cove were not a diversion, but were the real deal. He ordered his division to Sari Bair, the highest point on the peninsula. But while he himself was trying to get a better view of the situation, he saw exhausted men flooding back from the fighting. Upon ordering them to stop, they declared that the Anzacs were moving up and they themselves had no ammunition left. While Kemal's orderlies were running back to get the division moving, he ordered the men he'd halted to fix their bayonets, turn back to attack with the now famous words, "I don't order you to attack, I order you to die. In the time which passes until we die, other troops and commanders can take our place."
Hell is waiting.
This guy, Napoleon, I think Napoleon did a similar thing to his troops, if I remember right. He basically ordered them to die or something in a battle. I mean, I guess I understand why it's necessary, but not really the most motivating words you can tell your men,
Ocean meets the sand, cliffs of burden, where the soldiers rushed into
The pursuing Anzacs were totally caught off guard by the sudden counterattack. Fearing that Ottoman reserves had already arrived, they pulled back. Everywhere around Anzac Cove, the Ottoman resistance began to stiffen. Attempts to cross the ridges were immediately met with heavy fire from an unseen enemy. The invaders were stuck. At Helles, the situation was even worse. Way worse. This was an obvious landing site, and the Ottoman defenders had prepared thoroughly. As the Allied landing craft closed in on the beaches, they were met with a deadly hail of bullets. Many men were hit before they could make landing. Others panicked and jumped into the water. Many of those drowned, dragged down by their heavy kit. But those that made it out of the boats met belts of barbed wire guarding the beach, trapping them in the open. Soon, bodies littered the beach, and the waves washed ashore blood red. The men lucky enough to make it through huddled down behind a sandbank. At just 5 feet high, around 1.5 meters, it was the only cover available. Again, there were only a few Ottoman platoons defending the area, but they had fortified trenches and knew how to use their rifles and field artillery to deadly effect. The British officers could only watch as the landing crafts were blown to pieces. The men at Helles were trapped. Similar scenes happened at the other landing places. Y Beach was shot to pieces, while the attacks on X and S broke down the same way as the main landings without major results. Often forgotten by the history books is the French landing at Kum-Kale, the only semi-victory that day. That force, under General Albert d'Amada, was to silence the Ottoman guns on the Asian side of the straits and divert Ottoman troops. Their actual landing was nearly unopposed, but the overall Ottoman forces facing them were far more numerous than on the European side. Fighting for the tiny town lasted all day, but the vicious close-quarter combat was for naught. The invasion plan had failed. And as darkness fell, it came as a relief. For the exhausted Ottomans, it was time to fall back and reorganize and wait for the reserves. For the Allies, the cover of night was a saving grace. Finally, they could make a move. Men could come ashore, the injured could be tended to, and fresh officers could take charge. The wounded flooded back to the medical ships. But the doctors and nurses were not prepared for the amount of casualties. There was not enough room. There was not enough morphine. And even if a wounded man survived, it was still a journey of 600 miles, 1,000 kilometers, back to Alexandria to recuperate. And so the first day of Gallipoli came to an end. But the campaign had only just begun.
How many wasted lives? How many dreams they fade away? Broken promises they won't be coming home.
So, Joachim, tell us a little bit about the musical side of Cliffs of Gallipoli. Well, that's a good question, Joachim, because it's actually a song that took a long time to write. I started writing it in 2006, and it's actually one of those projects. Sometimes you start writing a song, and it takes a while before you get it done or finish it. But in many cases, it's been lying dormant. You haven't been working actively on it. In the case here, though, I think I constantly wrote on that song almost every day for 2 years.
Like, okay, so the finished released version, does it sound very different from when it came out?
Oh, yes and no. I mean, I don't know how many songs. I mean, all the parts that were taken away for that song probably could consist of 2 more songs in it. You know?
Wow.
Same thing for Bismarck, actually. It's probably 3 songs worth of writing in there. It didn't take as long, though. But with Cliffs of Gallipoli, I just felt that I had something special going on. And it's not a typical Sabaton song at all. Well, you know, you get these, you fall in love with some of your projects a little bit more.
Right.
And sometimes a little bit too much. This is one of those cases. I really felt it was something I wanted to make perfect, as good as I could. And for once, I actually think I couldn't have done it any better. Probably someone else could, but at least I couldn't. And it's one of the few times where a guitar solo I wrote ended up on the album.
Aha. Now, did you write the music and the words, or did you just write the music and the words?
The lyrics was written with me and Per together.
Okay.
Yes, really one of the most fantastic stories. And you know, in most cases, we actually get to visit the sites we sing about after we've done the song.
Oh yeah, sure.
And in this case, when we came to Gallipoli the first time, that is spooky because it's like paradise.
Yeah.
It's so beautiful there. And then you think, you know, you're walking around. What the, you know, where are the trenches? And then you almost fall and break your leg. It's like, okay, I guess there are the trenches.
Well, that's such a different contrast in the same war. Like, you know, we've talked about and we've visited together like locations on the Western Front at Verdun and stuff, and it is really somber. And it is, and you feel that there's been war here. But when you're like overlooking the Dardanelles and stuff, I mean, it's just fantastically beautiful. You don't think, I mean, there are, sure, there's earthworks and that they've rebuilt, and there's some physical buildings and defenses, but you don't see it unless you're thinking of it, that this was a place where thousands upon thousands of people died in horrible conditions.
No, I mean, and I also think that I would have done things differently. I mean, if me and Per had been there and seen that, we would have built in some parallels of, you know, the contrast of then and now in a way.
Oh, that'd be very interesting too. Well, maybe you could write another song about Gallipoli.
Yeah, I mean, this one gets 2 episodes, so maybe we should cover it again.
And
What do you think?
you've got all that extra music that didn't make the final. So you've got.
That is actually a really brilliant idea.
So you've made Cliffs of Gallipoli. This could be like the bays of Gallipoli, or the Sea of Gallipoli, or the Dardanelles.
The shores of Gallipoli.
Shores of Gallipoli. I see.
Ah.
All right. So on your second album, Great War Part 2, that's going to come out. Your 90s R&B album comes out in 2020.
Yes.
That's going to have Shores of Gallipoli on it.
Yes, a trap beat. Cool, man.
All right. Well, I think we've all learned something today.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Joachim.
Thank you for having me.
We'll see you next time.
Mothers, wipe your tears, your sons will rest a million years. Found their peace at last, as hope turned to friend, and forget that they knew they would die.
Okay, so there we have it. We have part 1 of the Cliffs of Gallipoli. It was very interesting listening to Joachim talk about writing this song. He said it took him a couple of years to do it. I wonder though, is he like a history buff? I mean, I would assume that he is. He and Par wrote this song. So I'd imagine, since they have so many songs about history, that they are all like history buffs and know a lot about it. Otherwise, I don't know how you would write songs about history. But I don't really know much about them, you know, as people or the band itself. And you know, how in the world they came to write about history. It sounds like that they write about some other things as well though. So anyway, I really enjoyed that. Learned a lot of new stuff that I didn't really get in the previous things on Gallipoli, so I'm glad that I chose this today. We're gonna go ahead and jump into part 2. I'm about to watch that now, and that will be released in my next video today, so make sure you go and watch that. We'll have the song included in that one as well. So Roger here, and I will see you shortly.